Aloha mai kako, and welcome to the National Museum of the American Indians webinar series, Youth in Action: Conversations About Our Future. Thank you for joining us. My name is Gabby Lee, and I'm a cultural interpreter at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. I'm also Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiian, and my family is from the island of Oahu, with roots on Maui and Hawaii Islands. Youth in Action is a monthly webinar series featuring young Native activists and changemakers from across the Western Hemisphere who are working towards equity and social justice for Indigenous peoples. As we begin today's program, I would like to gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. In recognition of Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, the NMAI has brought together 3 amazing panelists from across the Pacific to dive deeper into their traditional connections to land and water, and how this knowledge guides them in their environmental and activist work. From the beginning, Indigenous peoples have used their keen observations of nature to learn the best ways to work with their environments, to listen to what the land is telling us, what the waters are telling us. And this is science, perfected from thousands of years of experience and place-based knowledge. While the Pacific is beautifully diverse in its landscapes and cultures, we know as Indigenous peoples that we share certain essential understandings about our relationships to each other and the environment. We know that the ocean has connected us all in many ways since our ancestors first set out to explore the vast world around them. These connections and exchanges amongst diverse Pacific Island and Pacific coastal peoples have been going on for centuries and continue today. It's my pleasure to welcome our 3 guests today, Cami Tavares, Qatuwas Brown, and Francesca De Oro. Thank you all so much for being here. So if we could all go around and if you could each please introduce yourselves and where you're coming from. And let's start with Cami.
Aloha mai kako, o Cami Tavares, he kanaka oivio, ano and mayo. Hello everyone, my name is Cami Tavares. I am a Native Hawaiian and I am from Waianae, which is on the west side of Oahu. And I am a coastal researcher at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And my work focuses on historical shoreline change and coastal hazards such as coastal erosion and sea level rise.
Thank you. And now please, Francesca.
Sanamasi Gabi, Guahusi Francesca de Oro, Ginin Guahanzu, Hagan Guahans, and Islas Marianas. Hello, my name is Francesca de Oro. I am from Guajan in the Marianas Islands, and I am Chamorro, or Tautautanó, people of the land. And I am a freelance digital creator, yoga teacher, artist. I wear many hats in my community. I'm happy to be here today.
Amazing, thank you. And Qatuwas?
Yo, Qatuwas kunugwa, hailstoch nugwa. Gachel tas iste du kwe du lidina du nuhui nu channel. Uklanugwa, waglisla du nuhui gumshwa gala bella bella. So my name is Qatuwas, and I'm coming to you from Bella Bella, the Hailstoch homeland on the central coast of what now is now referred to as British Columbia. My ancestry is Hailstoch and Nuchonal from Hauset, and I work as the community engagement coordinator for the Hailstoch Climate Action, as well as a Hailstoch language student. And I'm just really excited to be here with you beautiful Indigenous women and to have a conversation that has meaning and hopefully will reach a lot of people. Jessica.
Thank you. Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much all for being here and from joining from all different places around the Pacific and around the world, really. And each of you have a unique perspective coming from these different communities and also having experience in many different fields, from science to art to farming and fishing and public policy. And Indigenous knowledge can inform any or all of these things. So bringing it back to the title of our conversation, can each of you share a little bit about what traditional ecological knowledge means to you? And can we start with Qatuwas?
Sure. So for me, The aspect of ancestral knowledge is just, so for me, I don't necessarily like to use the word traditional because it's an active collective lifestyle as Hilshoch people, as Indigenous people, that we're living and asserting. And for me, it's a knowledge base that has been passed down since time immemorial, since we were descended down from the cosmos and put into our unique places within the world, and that relationship. And I think it just all goes back into relationship of being connected to place and being connected to one another. And so I feel really blessed to be living in my homelands and to be walking in places where my ancestors have walked since time immemorial. As Hilshoch people, we have stories that talk about that we existed in the time of ice. And for me, that is ancestral knowledge being passed down. And now that's coming into alignment with science that shows on Tricket Island, they have carbon dated the Hilshoch people to at least 14,000 years. We say that we've been here since the time of creation. And so for me, that is ancestral knowledge that we have names that align with the time of ice. Like my Washamp, my uncle, he goes by Iceman because he holds one of those names. And so that's like living history, and that we all come, these women in this circle, we come from ancient societies that have existed way before what we're now walking in this colonial world with. So for me, I just like really grasp on and know that it's living and that we're actively breathing life into it.
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying about, you know, this guiding you, this ancestral knowledge guiding you everyday life, and how this lives in our language too, in our names and our language. So, yeah, thank you. And Francesca, what does traditional ecological knowledge mean to you?
So traditional ecological knowledge to me is, like Qatuwas said, it's being able to be in the line of a long chain of memory that goes back thousands of years. In the Marianas, we were first settled here about 4,000 years ago, and we were the first people to settle. So all of our names of our places coincide with our knowledge of the environment. There's places where, like along the coast, where it's called names like Litexan or Litidzan, which means to like turn. The water there is always turning. So in our language, we have keys to our environment that help us to understand more about it, so that we know how to survive within it. Traditional ecological knowledge is about protocol to me, and about knowing how to be in good relation with our land, our resources, our animals, and everything that we need to survive. So it's a long-term memory that we hold as Indigenous people of how to be in a respectful and sacred relationship with our land and our resources.
Sure, thank you. And Cami, same question. What does traditional ecological knowledge mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what Qatuwa and Francesca has said. It's our ancestral knowledge, and it is like what shows our relationship to our land. When I think of traditional ecological knowledge, I think of knowing what we call Aina Momona. So Aina translates into that which feeds, and Momona translates into fat, fertile, and rich. And when we put these words together, you can think of it as being in a state of abundance. And I think what our ancestors did to achieve that was they had this relationship to the land and to their community, and they were able to like know the language of the environment and utilize resources and still live in abundance. And being a coastal researcher, I see this knowledge as being something that has been dismissed and is the reason we're in a lot of issues today. And I see this knowledge base as a valuable and necessary knowledge base for addressing a lot of our issues today.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with what you're saying, that this is not only useful knowledge, it's necessary for going forward. So thank you all for sharing a little bit more about your perspective. And now I'd like to dive a little deeper into each of your specific work. So Cami, you've done a lot of work to study the shoreline around the island of Oahu and areas that will be most vulnerable to sea level rise. Can you tell us more about what you discovered through that process?
Sure. Yeah. So what I discovered in studying sea level rise on Oahu is that we're in a very complicated and challenging issue. As I mentioned earlier, traditional ecological knowledge was ignored. We've built roads, homes too close to the shore. As a result, areas are experiencing erosion, homes are falling into the ocean, roads are falling in. And so the response that we've had is we've hardened our shoreline by building seawalls. However, what that does, while it might protect our properties and homes, it destroys the beach, and we eventually will lose our beaches and the functions of our beaches. And so that's really important because there's so much that beaches offer us. They offer us protection. They offer us a space to socialize and to practice cultural things. That's where ba'a or canoes land. They are an important ecosystem as well. And so by losing these spaces, we lose all of those things. Our relationship to those spaces change. And again, it's because we've ignored, our ancestral knowledge. Our ancestors did not manage the shoreline the same way that we do today. We address issues property by property. However, that disregards the boundaries of beaches, which transcends private property boundaries. So the way that our ancestors did it is they had the moku system, which was a biocultural resource governance system. Within the moku, there was ahupua'a, which were vertical land divisions, often from mountain to sea. And connecting these ahupua'a were horizontal land divisions, which are called walls. And the coastline was one of these walls. And it's really important that we, return to this way of governing the shoreline because it is a community issue. It's not just the people that live there or have development there. It's everybody who has a connection to that space. It's everybody that is being protected by that area, that uses that area, who have genealogical ties to that area. So it's really important that we work as a community and manage these spaces as they should be. And that ultimately is returning to our ancestral way of governing our environment and our resources.
Thank you. Yeah, your work is so important. And I'd like to ask Qatuwas now about your work as part of the Hilsic Climate Action Team to create a community-led clean energy plan. So can you tell us more about that work and why energy sovereignty is so important?
For me, I'm working with the Hilsic Climate Action Team, and what we're doing is we're creating a community-led clean energy plan. And the whole process is to have collective climate action moving forward. We're part of the Indigenous Off Diesel initiative here in Canada, and we're in competition with 14 other First Nations to win $9 million to implement a clean energy strategy for our community to get off diesel. And it's a little bit of Hunger Games style in the sense of pinning First Nations against each other for government-based funding. But what we're doing is we're coming at it that either way, whether we win or we don't win, that we'll have a strategy moving forward, and we're going to work our hardest to implement sources of clean energy. And one of my elders, Gagam grandmother Caroline Hall, she said, and it means to gain our strength from our land. And for me, that is the sense of what clean energy is that we always have used the sun and the wind. It's how we've preserved our food. And that now we're just taking this into a modern context of how we live our lives now in the 21st century and like heating our homes. We have it's Ocean Falls, which is within our Hilsic ancestral territory. It's within the estate territory of the 5 Hilsic nations before we all amalgamated, and our population decreased by about 99.9% of the people from smallpox. And it's now operated by settlers within our territory, and we buy our energy back from the British Columbia BC hydro grid. And so when we talk about energy sovereignty, it's having authority over our own territory and the ways in which we're gaining our energy. So when we're switching our lights off and on, we know that it's coming from our homelands in a clean way and that we're in control of it. And so it's like switching the conversation to that as Hilshuk people, it's not just myself, but as a collective, we're moving forward to engage our people so that we're moving forward in the ways in which our people see fit. And we've actually been working with an online engagement platform called Othello. And what it is a consensus-based platform. And we've sent out our first phase, and that was like basically putting questions to our people around our clean energy plan. And it was really interesting because when we came back, Othello, they normally work with municipalities like settler populations, and they said this was the most consensus that they've ever seen on their consensus-based platform. So like our community does really hold a collective view and really does think of the collective. And so how do we put that into a context of modernity and around clean energy and Hilstroch energy sovereignty, and us having our own authority on the ways in which we're going to move forward, and kind of tying into what Cami was saying is we are facing climate change. Our community is a sustenance-based community where we live off of the resources of our ocean. And we are seeing dramatic changes. It's very hot out right now. Within, I think it was 2 years ago, was the first time we didn't ever have seaweed grow because it was so hot. And that's like lived experience of seeing our climate change right before our eyes. And I asked my late grandfather, Kaya, I said, Kaya, like I was in school for environmental studies at the time, and I was trying to talk about like seasonal indicators. And he was like, I could tell you that, but it's like, it's all changing. It's all different. And so within this like one generation, like my father to him, we see these major changes within our climate. And that's not unique to the Hilstroch people, just as Cami was saying. We're trying to lean on what you were referring to as traditional ecological knowledge, but then also the science that our world is shifting. And for me, when we're talking about energy sovereignty, it's like, as Hilstroch people, we're not just going to wait for that shift to happen, but how do we take control and be moving forward so that we're not just being dragged along by another colonial government, Canada, in this context. And we're not just going to let our world change before our eyes, but we want to have a say in the way it's happening.
Thank you. Yeah, that's beautiful. And this work to have control over our own resources and our own lives and just different aspects of our life. So
like
thank
sovereignty in regards to not just our climate, but our health, our well-being. It's all interconnected, right? Our language, our culture, and our school systems. And so like this is one aspect that I'm working on, but what I'm seeing working with my grandmother on our language, it's all so interconnected. And if we're not like talking to one another, even just within our nation, we can miss a lot of opportunities.
Exactly. Yeah, we're all connected, and all these, are connected to our traditional or ancestral knowledge. So Francesca, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the work you've done around sustainability and food sovereignty in Guajan. Can you tell us about how you got into that work?
So, my journey towards understanding food sovereignty and just sovereignty in general as a Native person really began for me around high school. And at the time, there was proposals being sent out by the military that our community was being given. It was like 10,000 page documents about the relocation of up to 10,000 Marines from Okinawa to Guajan. They had proposed building a brand new base with firing ranges over our aquifer, and there were talks about dredging coral reefs, about basically tainting our environment with more military action. And in Guajan, we already have a third of our land dedicated towards military bases. We have a Navy base and we have an Air Force base. And basically since World War II, we've had a very high military presence in our islands, but especially in Guajan. And with that has come the rise of westernization, the loss of reliance on sustainable agriculture and sustenance living. And we've really transitioned from being an island community that relied on 90% of our own homegrown food and resources to 90% imports. And with that came the decline of our health. So in just 2 generations, the instances of heart disease, cancer, diabetes have all shot up. And in my own line, I have heart disease and diabetes really strong. And my grandfather passed away from diabetes at like the age of 63, which is very young. And I kind of grew up with that consciousness about the health of my family because most of my relatives are in poor health. And as a high school student, learning about the issues that were being brought forth and like the increase in militarization, the increase in our colonial presence of the US military, it really made me reflect on my own way of living and how I can be kind of learning about these things firsthand, reconnecting to my roots through food and reconnecting to my body and my health through food. So I went on my own food sovereignty journey, kind of just experimenting by myself. But in the last year, at the rise of COVID, we really saw our community struggle with food and access to food. So we got a lot of imported goods from the US government, and most of it was like dairy, wheat, processed and canned meats. And our community already heavily relies on these kinds of processed foods, which are contributing to our negative health outcomes. And there was one community organization called Guajan Sustainable Cultures, and they are kind of an umbrella group, an umbrella nonprofit that works directly with farmers to help them kind of move their produce to more of the community, especially after COVID began. Most of the farmers had contracts with the hotels and tourism, and once that shut down, there was nowhere for them to really sell, and the local farmers market also shut down. So Guajan Sustainable Culture went directly to the farmers. They got donations from the community, and I think they also got some grant funding to give out these produce bags to people in the community for free. And so our group, Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, we work a lot with climate justice kind of framework, and we saw what they were doing is really, really valuable for the community. So we wanted to continue that conversation to boost what they were doing. So we did this whole video series last year called From Our Nanas for Our Nennies, and nanas means grandmothers, mothers, and nennies means the babies. And we wanted to really talk about food sovereignty. We wanted to talk about the history of farming and imports, history of colonization in our land, and we wanted to give an imaginative view of the future based on these interviews we had with farmers. And in our last 2 episodes, we really focused on larger scale farms, and we went and interviewed a 14-year-old farmer who worked like every day with his grandfather out in the fields growing watermelon for our community. And like that was a really, really wonderful interview to do because it really showed like a direct view of the future if we teach our children how important it is and how wonderful it is to be connected to the land. And then in the last episode, we really focused on health and holistic wellness as the final kind of picture of how food sovereignty plays into our political reality, our spiritual well-being, and our physical well-being. So in a community that is really, really struggling right now against continued colonization and seizure of our lands and really like violent use of our resources and the jeopardization of our water, asserting ourselves as a people connected to our land, connected to our resources, connected to our food is a huge part of our political sovereignty as well. And so that's how I got into that work. And I think about it every day. It's kind of hard to not think about it every day. But yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, thank you. And that makes sense. If all of these things are connected, it's present in your everyday life and your everyday thinking. And you guys are all in such different fields, but it just shows how connected all of these things are. And connecting with that Indigenous knowledge is so important for the continuation of our cultures and the protection of our environment. The NMAI and many scholars of Indigenous studies have used this term cultural survivance to describe the way Indigenous cultures have not only survived and endured, but continue to grow. And this term was developed by Anishinaabe scholar Gerald Visner, and he describes survivance as more than survival, more than endurance, or mere response. the stories of survivance are an active presence. And the active work that you all do are examples of survivance. So we're holding on to that traditional knowledge and at the same time taking advantage of new technologies and new discoveries and adapting to the changing world. So I'd like to ask each of you about how you see the idea of cultural survivance in the way that you balance or incorporate traditional knowledge with westernized knowledge or what is taught in most schools, and how that connects to your work. And let's start with Qatuwas.
Yeah, so and that's really hard. Like, I've been schooled in both Indigenous ways of being and schooled in the Western context, which I'm sure is similar to all of you sitting in this conversation. And what my Gagar Margaret said to me when I was in university, she said, just to be careful because Western education can be the last step in towards assimilation, that they really are like molding your mind in the ways in which you think. And that if you're not actively protecting your spirit, that you can be lost into that context. And I know scholar Leroy Littlebear, he talked about that with when we were really pushing Native education for Native people. And there was this whole surge in Native teachers across Indian country within the Americas and in the 70s. And then he wrote later in an article that he didn't realize as we pushed our students, our young people, that there was like a brain drain in our communities because we pushed our most brilliant young people into Western societies to become teachers, but we sometimes took those people out of their natural roles as speakers, language teachers, singers, those cultural people who are really like pivotal people for our communities. And so there has to be a balance because we are existing in this modern world, and that's what we're trying to do with our clean energy plan, is that we are using modern sciences, and we're not saying that they're invalid, but we're also, along the lines of what Cami was talking about, we're not invalidating our own Hills ways of existing. And that as I read through my community's comments on what we're facing as a community around climate change, I was like just moved because there's so much knowledge that exists. And at least in my experience, sometimes is that even around language is there's so much healing that has to happen before we can even have these conversations. Because people are really taught like, you're that dumb Indian through our residential school systems and have this deep feeling that what they have and the Indigenous knowledge that exists within their being that has been taught to them by their grandmothers and so on isn't as important or isn't as valid as Western ways of being, because it was really taught to them by white people that their way, our way, isn't right, it's wrong, it's dumb. And we have to unteach ourselves and reparent ourselves and break those intergenerational cycles in order to have thrivance, in order to be able to be existing in this term that you're using of like Indigenous survivance. And that's one thing I'm really seeing within, we had a food survey come to our community, Francesca, and we have people doing very, very similar work here. And I went over the survey with my gagam, my gran, and that was really what I could see, is that sometimes, you know, we do have our land is intact. We still have that continuing encroachment by settler society, but we have to push back. And sometimes our people aren't strong enough because there's so much pain that's still being pushed onto us. Our children are still being taken away from us, and that there's still so many things that are coming at us. And so I guess that's why like the survivance is relevant, because colonization is ongoing and we're still having to fight back. But the way I want to exist is like, I want to thrive. Like, I want to see my people thrive into like healthy people who are sovereign over our land, our water, and our being and way of existing in the world.
Yeah, I really like that word thrivance and the idea of, you know, survivance also evolving and changing and us being even more aspirational. And I think you said abundability too. I really like that
Yeah.
word. So I'd like to
Sorry.
ask Francesca the same question. How do you balance or incorporate these different types of knowledges?
Um, Gosh, in our education system here, it's very American, and when we start school, it's all in English, and really only get Chamorro language maybe 20 minutes a day in elementary school, and then that goes up to like an hour a week in middle school, and then in high school, you're only required to take language if you're in like certain schools. Not private schools don't have Chamorro language in their classrooms, and then by the time you get to high school, you really only have to take 1 year of Chamorro language. So right there, like it's already not a priority for most children growing up here to learn about our language, which is the foundation of our culture. And we have like Chamorro Heritage Month, which used to only be a week, and like slowly we're becoming more proud of being Chamorro and wanting to see more Chamorro media, Chamorro education. We just started the first immersion school for our nannies in pre-K and kindergarten, and they're working on it becoming a full elementary program. That just began in the last like 3-4 years. And so our language revitalization is becoming a part of our Western education system only now, after 75 years of true American occupation and Western schooling. And then by the time you get up to the college level is when you can really kind of dive into more of the meat of our Chamorro culture. There's Chamorro studies at our local university. There's Micronesian studies as an option for a master's degree. There's Chamorro language and linguistics. So I think that many strides have been taken in the last couple decades from my elders in making Chamorro culture, language, and knowledge part of the Western education system. But as a Chamorro youth, I do find that being in community, being in my family especially, is the closest way to learn about my traditional knowledge and learn our language. And there's a lot that is still missing from the Western education system. And a lot of that has to do with, like Qatuwas said, about the healing that we need to undergo as colonized people, as Indigenous people who have experienced a lot of trauma. And that's something that I've found through my relationship to ecological knowledge. So through my relationship to the land directly, I've been able to balance out some of what, the Western indoctrination has done about our self-esteem and about how we view ourselves, because so much of growing up in a US colony, especially because US culture is so dominant in our media and in what is seen as cool when you're growing up, like having a Chamorro accent, not even just speaking Chamorro, just having a really heavy Chamorro accent was something that people would get teased over. It would get called chod. And there's really been like this other shift and like a new renaissance for our generation of just feeling proud about being Chamorro and having these experiences. So balancing it out, I don't really know how to balance it. I just know that in my own experience, I try to celebrate as much as I can about being Chamorro, about being Dudas, which means like being beautiful in Chamorro, and like the small aspects of pride that I can find, but especially like feeling pride over our ways of being and really feeling connected to the knowledge that I get to learn, and feeling really grateful to be a Chamorro youth who gets to, learn as much as I can about our culture, and pass it on for the future.
Yeah, so much important things that you said, like just how we can't rely on the maybe formal education system to give us everything, that connection that we need. And like seeking out our elders is one really good way to um, get more of that knowledge and learn more. So Cami, was there anything you'd like to add about this topic?
Yeah, first, I just want to thank you guys for sharing those stories. I mean, they're super relatable and ancestral knowledge with what is taught in westernized schools is that I always acknowledge my ancestral knowledge. I do work in a very westernized space, so things that I value and find important are, as a Kanakawiwi, things that I find important as a Kanakawiwi are overlooked. And so I have to do things in a way where I stay true to myself and my values as a Kanakawiwi. And one of the ways that I do that is what we've mentioned before, is by using our language, because language is the foundation of our peoples. As a Kanaka I connect more with the Olelo Hawaii names, the Hawaiian names. These are the names that our ancestors chose, and it holds their knowledge and their stories of our places. And so one way that I stay true to my ancestral knowledge in these Western spaces is by using those names. As a coastal researcher, we're researching a lot of different places, and there's a lot of contemporary names for those places. But what I do is I use our Olelo Hawaii name. And just like something that I've been working on is I manage a lot of data files for our office, and I've been changing them. And these are like hundreds, maybe thousands of files, but I think it's super important to do. And while that's not asked of me, and I could get away with not doing it, it's important to me. And so I do take the time to do stuff like that. Another way that I balance, being in a Western space is by surrounding myself with people who, understand me, other Kanaka Oiwi, other like-minded people. Because like as a scientist, I wanted to be a scientist because our ancestors were amazing scientists. They weren't just a geologist, they weren't just a biologist, chemist, meteorologist, they were all of those things. And so while I understand that, and a lot of people might not, and they might dismiss it. And so it's really important for me to make sure I'm surrounded by people who think the same way and understand the same things, because whenever that knowledge or my values are discredited, it's important to have that kind of people supporting you to help you through those experiences and remind you that you are valid and that you belong in those spaces. That's what I try to focus on.
For sure. Thank you. And a lot of you are talking about how our knowledge and our values have been undermined, erased, and even like Qatuwas was talking about in schools, told that they were dumb or not important. But all this important work that you guys are doing in your communities is working to change that. So I'd like to ask each of you, how do you see your work making change in your community? And let's start with Francesca.
So just in the last year, I really focused on creating video media, and that's something new for me. I had been featured in videos, and I saw the power of that medium to get messages across. Like I did a feature with AJ Plus on food sovereignty in 2017 or 2018, and it had like 2 million views on Facebook, and like hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube. And it was a feature on different scholars from Guam talking about our food sovereignty and about how we've shifted to the videos. Was titled like why is spam so popular in Guam, and I'm sure like you guys in Hawaii like know like how that somehow that's become like a cultural thing for Pacific Islanders who had American occupation after World War II. So they interviewed me and my partner because of our lifestyle. We really wanted. We're using social media already to share about our traditional practices and what we were learning as Indigenous people, and planting our own food and like making local food out of sustainably grown things from the garden that my grandma taught me how to make, things like that. And so this video got huge reach, and I would get all these DMs from people, Chamorro people, saying like, this really opened my eyes, this taught me so much about our history, this made me feel empowered, and it just really opened my eyes to the power of sharing our stories. So right now I'm working on storytelling. Last year we did our 5-part video series on food sovereignty, and the feedback on that was small, but it was really nice to hear back from the community, like nice things about how good it is to like learn recipes from other people who look like them and things like that. And so we're focusing on media this year, and we have a series coming out now during all of Earth Month about our waste crisis. So from our Nanas Foreign Nannies, we did a lot of interviews in our community about our trash problem here, because that's another issue that we are seeing kind of balloon to this proportion and become a continuous issue. And I really believe in the power of media and that it shows us in our community that we don't only have to have negative views of ourselves, and that we can have solutions that come from us and our ancestors and our traditional knowledge for all of the issues that we face. And so much of our media that I grew up with really was negative about our government, about our people, about our management of our land and our resources. And I hardly ever saw it get to the root of why our people are facing poor health outcomes, or have drug problems, or why we have issues with land ownership, or we would see and then, the military buildup would be touted as this great economic boom. So the power of media to shape conversations about solutions and about empowerment is really something that I see, and I see other people harness it for different motives. And so why not be the person in there trying to use it for a positive change? So that's really what I'm doing right now. And just like social media in general is a really great place to share what you're doing, and build your own little community of other Indigenous people. Like Cami was saying, it's important to have people support you. I feel like I have people who support me through social media from like thousands of miles away, from many different cultures, because our stories, when we tell them from a sincere place, have this power to really reach each other from heart to heart, from spirit to spirit. And especially as Indigenous people, like, we do have so much power collectively to solve these issues that we face that are also very, very similar. And I see the power of media and like doing things like this, having these conversations, and that's where I want to be. I want to be continually having these conversations and asking these questions from lots of people just like you, because the more perspective we gain and the more solidarity that we have, the closer we can get to a future that is better and more beneficial and has thrivance and abundability for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. And so, Qatuwas, how do you see your work making change in your community?
Something definitely that I've thought about. Like I've worked for multiple Canadian institutions, University of British Columbia and University of Victoria, and being in those spaces, I felt like I was a tokenized Indigenous person who wasn't pushing forward the agenda of my community and my people. Like I didn't feel like I was being a change maker and a spark of light that I know I have the ability to be. And when I came home to my community here in the central coast of BC, the Heilstchoch Nation, it's actually my people and my homelands putting like such good medicine and good energy into me, and like sparking my fire, and knowing that I'm contributing in ways that it's not just pushing forward that colonial agenda, but it's pushing forward the agenda made for Heilstchoch people by Heilstchoch people. So when we're looking at the context of clean energy, it's how does that change somebody's life on the everyday within my community? We recently installed over 130 heat pump systems that filters the air and is based on clean energy source. And some of the homes that we put these heat pumps into, they did not have most of them didn't have adequate heating. And so that's making a major change in the everyday life of my people and pushing forward back on those stereotypes, and that we deserve to live good lives, that we deserve to live in harmony, and we deserve to have relationship with our place in this world and live in relationship with our culture and our community, and not be continue to be oppressed and live in poverty, that we deserve nice homes. And that's a way in which I see my work making a difference, and tying in my I've been on this journey of language Heilstchoch learning, and also learning about my own trauma, and learning about how I've been steeped in this, which is not just unique to me, but steeped in being raised by people who are just trying to do the best that they possibly can, being raised by residential school survivors. And just being vulnerable enough to tell our stories, and that like, so what Francesca was talking about, that our stories matter and that they all are interconnected. And that as I make waves in my community and try to find things that light me up. So it's like, I feel so much different being here than being in those colonial institutions where the work that I'm doing, I feel like it actually matters. And that's really what I believe, is that we all just want to belong. Like, we all want to be making a difference. And that's where I feel like I belong and make a difference, is within my village. Is like when I'm working with my clout, my community. And so that's the way in which I'm doing it. And I think that it's really strong in the sense that it's collective community action. So climate action for and by the collective. So it's not by me. It's like getting to work with my people and bring their vision to light.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Um, and I'd like to ask Cami as well, how do you see your work making change in your community?
How do I see my work making change in my community? I want to talk about two things, but first I want to say that, like, this isn't something I would ever give myself credit for. It's just, these are things that have been worked on by many people over many decades, and that it's really just something that I, have been working towards, and super excited to see some positive changes. So the first is going to be related to my research, my coastal research on shoreline hardening. So we've seen recently some policies have changed. They've become stricter on how we develop our shorelines, and whether or not people can build seawalls, or like they make it harder for people to build seawalls. And they change the language so that we are protecting beaches over protecting people's properties. And I feel like there's a lot of awareness. Francesca, as you mentioned, like social media, there's people connecting from around the world, and are really moved by like our stories and the way that we see things. And I see that for shoreline hardening and beach loss. So many more people are talking about it on social media. And it's not just people in Hawaii, but people globally. And so I see a lot of positive changes in terms of protecting our shorelines and protecting our beaches. The other thing that I want to talk about was talking about what I mentioned earlier about how I try to like use our language in Western spaces. And so I did get an email once from somebody that we were collaborating with. This person worked in a government agency, and they manage like the most sacred places in Hawaii. However, they use contemporary names, and these names are often just like foreign explorers or an item that they found in those spaces. However, like as I mentioned before, I find a lot of value in using our Olelo Hawaii names, and so just by me and my colleagues using those names, this person had emailed us and had thanked us for doing that, because they always had this feeling like they wanted to use the Olelo Hawaii names, but never had the confidence to do so. And so by us just being us and making it normal, like they, also felt like they could do it. And they had said that before they retire, they want all of the places to be called by the ancestral names. And so I think that's super cool. And then even more recently, another person, not necessarily like directly related to this person, they don't work in the same office, but it's the same agency. They had presented on one of those areas, and they used the Olelo Hawaii names. And so I just think that it's really cool that just by being ourselves, we can make change in these Western spaces, and it's happening more and more with every Kanaka Weevi, every Native person that is filling these spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's so inspiring, really. And you all are making a huge impact. And it's really great to hear all of your successes. Like I said, it's really inspiring to hear also like our common goals through these we'd like to hear from Francesca. So the Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean in the world, and it covers more than 30% of the Earth's surface. So, Francesca, even though our communities may seem physically distant from one another, how have you been able to see connections between our Pacific communities?
Thank you for the question. Guajan is in the middle of Micronesia, which is this group of islands, all small islands, and throughout our history, we've been connected through our waterways, through our traditional navigation and sailing. And those are things that are still happening today. We're some of the last navigators left on this earth. And so that's one way that we stay connected is physically with our brothers and sisters from our region. And in the Northern Mariana Islands, where there are Carolinian people who are descended from another island, but they're also considered indigenous in Saipan because they've been there for so long. This idea that we can share our lands with each other and share our resources with each other and really connect with each other that's nothing new for us and our people, as seafaring people, as indigenous people here in this side of the Pacific. But before our ancestors sailed as far, we don't even know how far they sailed. But we have the songs. We have there are still Micronesian people, Satualis, Polowatis, Yapis, people who still know the chants, the songs, the coordinations to reach each other across the entire ocean. And I think that's wonderful and that's magical and something that I'm really proud of being a Pacific Islander, is knowing that it's in our ancestral ties and connections and knowledge to connect to one another and know how to do that in a respectful way that is acknowledging of other indigenous people and their lands and their ways and how to be within their spaces. So I see connection through Pacifica people all the time online these days, and I really love that our connection is often rooted in our shared traditional values. Before we understand much about each other, like we all walk into the same spaces with a very similar set of values of respect and honor and dignity and truth. And that's a lot of the way that I try to move in the world, is in that same understanding of my place as an indigenous person, but I'm representing my community, my people, my ancestors, and I also see that and acknowledge that in other indigenous and other Pacifica people. But yeah, the way that we're connected, we will always be connected. The ocean is our mother. All life comes from the ocean and our waters, and that's something that we can connect on, being protectors of this same space, this same sacred resource.
Thank you. Absolutely. And next, I'd like to ask Cami, what has been the most rewarding thing about your work in environmental issues?
I'd say the most rewarding thing has been being heard. I was recently published in a scientific journal talking about beach loss. And because of that, I was interviewed, not just locally, but globally. I did an interview with even like a Dutch magazine. And so I think it's been really cool being heard. And I think with more changes happening in our policies, I feel like I've been heard by our policymakers as well. But the best thing, though, is being heard by other Kanaka Wiwi, especially our youth, those who want to be scientists one day, because it can be really intimidating being in these spaces, going through Western academia. And so, I mean, I just feel really honored to be heard, because I get the chance to show other Kanaka Oiwi that they can be in spaces like me and they can be heard. And so, yeah, that's been the most rewarding part.
Yeah. Congratulations on your publication. And what we've all been saying, is for so long, our knowledge has been, erased or ignored and not heard. So definitely what you're saying about being heard is so important. And Qatuwas, earlier you spoke about why energy sovereignty is so important. What are some lessons learned that you would share with other communities who are working towards becoming energy sovereign?
Yeah, so I definitely wouldn't say we're at the place of being energy sovereign yet, but it's what we're working towards. And we haven't like been creating the wheel. Like we've been working with Indigenous clean energy and utilizing resources. Like we worked with a community based in the Arctic, a Nunavut community who had a clean energy plan, and pulling from things that other communities have already created and putting our lens on it. And so changing it so it fits our community, and recognizing that there are other communities doing this work and having those conversations. So for the Hillstroke Nation, at least our team, the Hillstroke Climate Action Team, that's been some of the best resources, is talking to people who are already doing the work. And that's the kind of advice that I would give, is that you don't always have to recreate the wheel, is having those conversations with people who are already doing the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of connecting back to what Francesca was saying, these connections, and we can learn from each other, our communities. So yeah, that's beautiful. Um, Moving on, I'd like to ask one of each of you, what's one thing you would share with audience members, especially youth, who want to support coastal communities but might not live near or have access to the ocean? So Francesca.
Sure. Just to remind everybody about the interconnection of all of our lands and waters. Our god for water is named Saina Isa, and she is visually is represented by the rainbow. The word Isa means the rainbow. And the reason why she is our god of our water is because the rainbow is part of the water cycle. It only shows up after the rain. And we acknowledge that every part of our ecology moves through cycles, moves through systems, and we're globally connected. And our water especially connects us. And so if you live in the land, if you live in a mountainous region, what you do there does not mean that it doesn't affect the ocean. It very strongly is affected in the ocean. And our oceans are warming at alarming rates. We are experiencing lots of plastic pollution, and living in Guajan and in our region, we are inundated with foreign plastic every day on our beaches. And that's something that is a direct effect from people living far away, like different countries that I've never been to. We can see their trash washing up on our shores. So remembering that every action that you take on the land affects the ocean, affects the water eventually, is just something that would be helpful if more people from non-coastal communities remember and acknowledge that the land that you live on is ultimately connected to the ocean. So protecting the water where you are is very important. Knowing about the environmental issues happening in your area is very important. Knowing about the native issues in your area is also very important, especially if you're a settler, to get knowledgeable about what's going on in the land that you're on, and then doing your best to be a steward of the environment as well. All of us are children of the earth. We're children of our land. If you're Indigenous or not, we all share this planet. It's one big island. And if we remember that we're connected, that we need to be there for each other, and there for our land, there for our animals, relatives, our waters, and moving in a way that is ultimately conscious of that interconnection is really important for all of us, and especially people who may not have this native connection and this traditional ecology and this knowledge, is understanding the responsibility that we all hold to learn about our environment and the effects that we have on it as human beings in this modern world.
For sure. Yeah. So much good advice in there. And also just that idea that we're all connected. So Qatuwas, what about you? What advice would you give to people who might not live near the ocean?
Yeah. So I worked for Ocean Networks Canada for 3 or 4 years when I was first out of university, and I'd give these talks to students, and I was hired on to basically bring an Indigenous perspective into ocean science. And one thing that really always stuck with me is that um, every other breath that we take comes from the ocean, and that it is like our world's natural carbon sink, but it's also producing oxygen, all of the kelp forests. And we think of our forest often as like what is providing life, what is breathing life into our being. But every other breath that you're taking, whether you're a person from the coast or you're from the inland, you're connected to the ocean because it's literally breathing life into your being. And it takes up over 70% of this world. And so that's the kind of advice I always give, is that no matter what, it's just to echo Francesca. You're in relationship with the ocean because the ocean, she's breathing life into you. So what are you going to give back? How are you going to be in relationship in a good way, in an honorable way, with your place in the world that contributes and impacts the ocean?
Yeah. And for everybody to understand the importance of their choices and that they have this responsibility, no matter, like you said, if you're on the coast or inland. So, Cami, what about you?
So it's just really important that we all take care of the areas that we live, restore native forests, protect clean water, protect access to spaces, just like all of those things. It's super important that we do protect our own homes because everything is connected and we see that. And so, yeah, I would just say think like the Moku system.
Yeah, and even just today, like we may seem distant from each other, but we're all really connected through our cultures and through these conversations. Um, so we've talked about our environments, not just the Pacific Ocean, but all environments being connected. And it's important for us to be conscious of how our choices affect the environment. And each of you in your own work are practicing cultural survivance in your own way. So I'd like each of you to talk about what gives you hope in facing these larger issues of climate change and working towards cultural survivance or thrivance. So Cami.
Yeah, so the thing that gives me hope is people like you guys, like you ladies, people like us, people who think like us, being a part of the conversations of climate change and environmental issues, because we have a lot to offer. We all understand the importance of ancestral knowledge, and from that, we can form better place-based solutions. And as everyone has talked about today, community is at the core of everything. It's how we are, it's how we function. And just by being us and having that kind of priority is that our solutions will come from within communities, because that's so important. There's nobody that knows a place better than the people who are from those places, and who have, ancestral knowledge of these places. I just get a lot of hope that, we are there, we're in the communities, we're in the conversations, and we're making a lot of positive change. And we also come from resilient people. Our ancestors have experienced significant environmental and social changes, and yet our culture and our people still persist and are working on thriving and are thriving in some places. And I think, just like while we ourselves might not have done it, our ancestors did it, and it's like within us to be able to also be able to share our knowledge and share our values with others, so that we can also adapt to the changes that we see in our environment. So it's just listening to your guys' stories today, I just feel so connected. Like, while we may not have met in person, I feel like we have met in spirit. And that gives me a lot of hope that there are people like all of you doing the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing, and thank you so much for sharing. And Francesca, what gives you hope?
So in the web series that we produced this last month, and even this legend that I grew up hearing about, it's called the Maidens of Guam, and the legend as it's told is a long time ago, there was a giant fish that came to our land and was eating and eating and eating at the middle of it. And the community didn't know how to deal with this giant fish eating their land, so they sent out the men to try and kill it. They did all these things, and it wasn't until the women got together at the river and they decided to weave their hair in a giant net to catch the fish that it was finally caught. And so this legend is something that I feel like is a gift from our ancestors to remind us of our collective power and our wisdom when we literally put our heads together. And I feel so much hope in meeting new people who I feel like are able to weave their part of the net. And there are so many big fishes that we're facing in our time, and especially in our islands. And there's many different battles that we need to be thinking of in different ways all the time. But I know that there's more than just me, and that gives me hope, because I'm not the only person who has to go out there and be the hero for my community or for this planet. There's so many of us doing little things or big things, whatever we're doing, however we are being ourselves in this movement and this work is powerful. And it's remembering that our collective responsibility and our collective power is so much greater than our individual power. So, or individual, action. So that's what gives me hope, is remembering that I'm not alone in any of this work. I have my ancestors, I have my family, I have a lot of the youth also who give me so much hope, because they hear and they learn about all of these things that we're talking about, and they really take it on in such like a sincere and they have a sincere and hopeful way. They give me so much hope because they see the way the world is, and they are not going to settle for it being like this for the rest of their lives. The youth are really, really strong.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that story. It's such a great lesson in there about the power of, community and working together. Qatuwas, what gives you hope in facing these larger issues?
Yeah, I guess what gives me hope is the fact that no matter what we do, like, Earth will live on. And maybe it won't be with people. Like, maybe human beings won't be here, but Earth will be here. And the energy of our old ones will be here, because we are Earth and Earth is us. I'm really hopeful when I'm home in my homeland here in Hillstroke territory, and I see our young people, and they're just eager. They want us to feed them the old ways of existing. They're yearning for songs and language and Indigenous ways of existing. And I don't think that's unique to the Hillstroke homelands, but I see that as our young people are becoming educated and educated in ways of the spirit and the mind and the body, and the ways in which living in those harmonious ways in a good relationship. And that gives me hope that if we made that shift on not just within Indigenous communities, but it really comes down to, are we going to do that as a global society, as people of Earth? And if we don't, it's kind of a moot topic, and Earth will bring up new, beautiful life. And I think that our spirits really exist within our places of the world, and that it comes down to, can settler people switch their mentalities to thinking in an Indigenous way of existing, to be in relationship with where they're existing in this world, not to destroy beaches in a place as beautiful as Hawaii because they want to live right on the waterfront? How do we switch our value system and have those core morals? And, I have to reflect on that every day, on like, what am I putting into my body? What am I listening to? What am I surrounding myself with? Because even as much as I'm fighting back, I'm still existing in this colonial world and was brought up through these colonial school systems, even though like I went to a school within my own home community. And I do see shifts even from the younger generations that are coming up, where they can go out and harvest. Right now it's seaweed season, gust, and they're allowed to leave school to harvest. And that gives me hope because they're gaining relationship with place by harvesting. And so what I'm just hopeful for is that there'll be a major collective shift and that more people will engage in these types of conversations and look from more of a collective viewpoint than that individualistic viewpoint.
For sure. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so much of what you're talking about the youth is so true, that they have this sort of like hunger for this knowledge and wanting to connect. And I think it's changed even since like I was young. There's like a surge of energy and just like, desire to have these conversations, and all the things that you guys have shared today, the stories, the knowledge, is helping our audience, to take action in their own ways. So it's so important to have these conversations, to know to trust our Indigenous knowledge, and to seek it out, to spend time with our environments and develop a relationship with them. Even if you don't live near the ocean, you can take steps to develop a relationship with your environment. And we can all continue to do this work and have this conversation after today. You can learn more about some of our panelists' work by checking out their social media and visiting the websites you see here. I want to sincerely thank Cami, Francesca, and Qatuwas for taking the time to be here and share today, and to inspire our audience to take action in their communities. Thank you to the Rasmussen Foundation for their generous support of this program, and to everyone that has worked on our Youth in Action series. Recordings of past episodes in this series are posted on the museum's YouTube channel. To learn more about traditional knowledge and the environment, and to explore other ways you can enjoy the National Museum of the American Indian from home, please visit our website at americanindian.si.edu. Thank you for joining us. Mahalo.